Welcome back to Philosophy for Flourishing, the show where we explore principles and practices for living the best, most fulfilled life possible. Sorry, I've been gone for a couple of weeks. I was busy helping organize TosCon 2021, Philosophy for Freedom and Flourishing, which is a really cool conference that we just wrapped up in Newton, Massachusetts, just down the street from me. It was a great time. I spoke on Benjamin Franklin, and if you guys are interested in that, let me know. I'm thinking about taking the audio or maybe even the video from that and sharing it here on the podcast. So let me know if you're interested. And while there, I met a lot of really cool people. One of them, who's joining me today, Mike Gustafson, who lives right down the road from me, about an hour away. And Mike has his own school, the Atlas Academy. So thank you for joining me today, Mike.
Absolutely, John. Thanks for having me.
All right. So I want to talk about a bunch of stuff today. The Atlas Academy, how you got into it, Montessori education. Let's just start with Atlas Academy. What was the impetus for it? What got you interested in doing it? And how did it come about?
Right. So before we opened the school, my wife and I was a kindergarten teacher in a public school. And at the time, I didn't have any kids. Then we had a boy, and we started looking around at different daycares, and we didn't really like what we saw. And I had learned about the work of Maria Montessori through my graduate program while I was getting a master's in education. And we decided just to take a leap and start our own school and do it according to the work of Montessori. And so now we just finished 3 years. We're going into our fourth. We have about 60 students from toddler all the way up through fourth grade. And we have 4 teachers, 4 classrooms. They're all mixed age classes. And yeah, it's going really well so far. Our long-term plan is to build this school all the way through high school.
Well, you're going to need a lot more rooms if you're going to do that. I was, before we got on, I was on your website and you have this amazing 360 tour that I'd love to know how to do that stuff.
Those cameras are awesome.
It's incredible. I couldn't figure out how to go up the stairs, so I'll have to figure that out. Or maybe I should just come, it's an hour away, come and walk up the stairs myself.
Yes, that too.
But yeah, I mean, you've got a 4-room schoolhouse.
We'll need a bigger building, you're right.
Yeah,
it's a 4-room schoolhouse. And we'll move somewhere larger nearby when we need to, which is coming up.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So I know a big question in the minds of many, many parents is, how can I help my child develop? And you, of course, were really interested in this question. So interested that you started your own school using the Montessori method. So I'm just, what advice do you have? What thoughts do you have on this subject? And what does Montessori bring to the table?
Yeah, I think one of her fundamental beliefs is in auto education, she calls it. So it's the idea that children, they are forming themselves. They do the work. No one else can do it for them. We can only get in the way or help them with it. And so the work that she did was to observe children in their natural, spontaneous activities, and then to figure out what kind of environment do we put around them that's going to help them to grow and develop to reach their full potential. Just like if you're trying to grow some sort of plant, you need the soil to be a certain way and just enough water and needs the right amount of sunlight. There's certain conditions that lead to the optimal growth of a plant. She believed, and same with me, that there are optimal conditions that we can discover through a scientific process, which help children to really thrive and flourish.
So a lot of Montessori has to do with the environment. And can we get more specific? So of course, with a plant, we know we need a certain amount of sunlight and water, but kids, they need more than just sunlight and water. So what do they need in the environment that helps them to develop?
Yeah. So there's obviously the physical facility, like a home or a classroom or the outdoors. And then there's what's in it, the materials, the things for them to get their hands on and use. And so my experience is really up through elementary right now. So I don't have any experience with secondary. So even up through elementary, you're really talking about hands-on materials. So there's the layout of the space, there's the materials that are in the space, and then there's the other people. And then there's the interactions between all of that. How do the children handle the materials? How do they interact with others? How does the teacher or the parent interact with the kids? This is the environment.
And the materials, I've seen things like there are wooden pegs that are of varying sizes, and they have to go into a board that has holes of varying sizes. So you've got to get it in the right hole. So it's like the materials themselves are guiding the children to developing their own ability to problem solve, right? Is
Yeah,
that
it's
right?
like when you look at stuff like that, some at first you're like, what, like, why this? Like, why these particular materials? Like, those are the knob cylinders that you're talking about. It's
Mm-hmm.
like a puzzle. They have to find the right holes for things. Or they have these little shapes that children take out and put on a piece of paper and trace the shape. Or there's those little counting beads or objects for them to sort by the first sound. Like, why are these materials in the environment? I mean, if Montessori discovered this method and principles and materials through a scientific process, it can't just be chance. It can't just be that she's thinking, oh, maybe, I know as an adult that this is what's best for the kids, so this is what I'm going to put in their environment. That's not how she arrived at any of this. She started by observing the children and their spontaneous actions, like a scientist, and she is trying to discover what their needs are. But you can't just do that in a vacuum. You like she talks a lot about how experimental psychologists are studying children kind of like in a like in an office or something, in some sort of artificial environment, and how these people, like, she talks about some scientist named Fabre who's studying insects, and how he isn't doesn't take insects out of their environment and put them in a laboratory environment to study them. He goes and he watches their activities in their natural environment. So for Montessori, she needs to create an environment. So she starts out trying different materials and putting letters and numbers and beads and different puzzles for them to use. And then she observes and sees what happens. And she, through this type of experimentation, she's optimizing for what? What is she optimizing for in the environment? It's to pull their attention, to attract them, and not only to attract their attention, but to direct it towards some purposeful end. And that's the standard which she used to develop all of her materials. Does it attract and direct the child's attention towards some sort of purposeful work?
Yeah, and I
And
love
so
her.
that's, yeah,
Yeah, I love her use of this concept of work. She has this quote, and I know that she was very much about independence as well, and that we need independence to do this kind of work. And I did a hero show. There's another podcast that we do through Objective
right.
Standard Institute where Andrew Bernstein and I did an episode on Maria Montessori. And so I came across this quote when I was doing research for that show, and I just want to read it because I think it really helps to put Montessori's educational philosophy on the table here. So she says, the child seeks for independence by means of work, an independence of body and mind. Little he cares about the knowledge of others. He wants to acquire a knowledge of his own, to have experience of the world, and to perceive it by his own unaided efforts. He must clearly understand that when we give the child freedom and independence, we are giving freedom to a worker already braced for action, who cannot live without working and being active. This he has in common with all other forms of life, and to curb it makes him degenerate. I love that. So putting the child into this preset environment where there are certain cues to take certain actions, certain things that are interesting to the child that will get him to expand his awareness of something and to do some form of work. Now, I don't have kids. Maybe someday I will, but one thing that comes to mind nonetheless is there any sort of set curriculum for students to go through? And how, as a parent, can you be confident that your kid is going to get what he needs to then go out and to make it in the world?
Right. I love that. And children do have a sense of their own kind of their own achievements and their own growing powers. And that it really is what motivates them towards further accomplishments. And they need to have materials around them which kind of call to them at whatever stage they're at. it's not always the same work that each child is going to be attracted to. So really, you can't figure that out ahead of time, what each child needs. You have to kind of observe and follow them and figure out what they like. I mean, just for instance, and what you're doing is you're trying to find ways to kind of prolong their work, to take whatever they wherever they are and make it a little bit more purposeful and a little bit more um, um, involved. And so my son, he likes cars. He's 4. And so he has a bunch of toy cars, and now he knows the names of them, and he tells me he's going to buy a Bugatti when he's older.
Yes. Excellent.
And so
I'm a
now he's at,
Mustang guy. 59 months Mustang. Someday I will have that car.
you will, John, I believe in
69,
you.
sorry.
And and so now though he's kind of at a new level where he's asking how fast these cars go, and he
Mm,
tells me this car goes 69 3,000 million 22 miles per hour, and that's because that's how he does
it's
numbers now,
accurate.
big numbers. He just knows it's a lot. And but he wants to know actually how fast they go. So we have his Bugatti that goes, I forget what it was, like 273 top speed. I don't remember.
Crazy.
And then we have his Lamborghini that has a top speed. And so the next step after that is we have a label maker. So not only so we already have the labels for the cars, the names of the cars. And the next step is to label them with speeds. So now he has, it's kind of like he's learning math, I guess, and which number is 273 bigger than 214? Like that's hard for a 4-year-old. Um, but it's kind of like taking his natural interest, this is from a parenting perspective, and just trying to take it one step further
Yeah, that's great.
and
So
direct it.
you use terms like structure and independence. Is that right to describe the sort of environment and how you is this correct? And how you think about helping the child increase his independence?
Yeah, so the only way for them to actually grow is through their own efforts, through which are based on their own interests. So they actually can't. So independence, in that sense, is that they're acquiring powers on their own because they want to and because they're provided the opportunities to. So they're acquiring new powers, and these could be physical powers like getting dressed, or it could be um, mental powers like reading, right? And so they're gaining independence through using materials they're interested in, and um, and acquiring new powers through that.
I'm glad you brought up reading. I've got some friends whose first child kind of a late talker, and they were really worried about it for a while. And I know that one thing that interests a lot of new parents is, how do I help my child develop that language, that conceptual capacity, so that he can hone in on things and ask for things and make his thoughts and feelings clear. Is there anything within the Montessori education that you guys are doing, any advice or thoughts you have for parents out there on helping them to develop that language capacity?
Right. So there are direct ways to help a child with language acquisition, which is first speaking and listening, and then later reading and writing. Um, there are direct ways. So just one, I had a family today that I was talking to about helping their almost 3-year-old. They were in here for a tour, helping her with her verbal expressive language. And just one simple piece of advice that I gave was to provide feedback. Children need feedback on their expressive language in order to hear how they are saying it, or maybe hear a better way. And the feedback can be very and should be very natural and organic. So if my son says something that's a little bit off, I'll be like, "Oh, and you mean this?" And then I'll say it back to him so he gets feedback, and that's helped him a lot. And generally, that helps kids to work on their own language because without that feedback, how are they going to know? You know?
Hmm.
Um, and then with reading and writing, one thing that's interesting to me is that even the literacy materials that are in a Montessori prepared environment, they're not there because we as adults say kids should learn to read and write. Even though that's not why they're there. They're there because the kids have an authentic, real interest in letters and words because they see them everywhere and they're attracted to it, usually around 3 years old, something like that. And so, even with that, we're just supplying them with materials which allow them to engage with the things that they're interested in and thereby grow themselves internally and learn the sounds and learn how to even there's plenty of games. One game, this is more to your question, that helps kids with early literacy. A game that I played with my son that we also use at our school is just sound games, any sound game. So it could be rhyming, where you say a word and they rhyme it. But one of my favorites is that I try to say a word really slow and see if they can guess the word that I'm saying. Or if there's objects in front of us, I'll say a word really slowly and then see if they can give me that object or put that object in a jar or something like that. Everything you do, you try to make it fun. But when you're doing that, when they hear a word very, very slow, and what I'm doing is breaking up the sounds, then in their mind, they have to put together the sounds, which is the second step in reading. The first step is matching the letters with the sound. So then you get the sounds in your head, like k, a, t. The second step is to blend those together to hear the word and then retrieve the concept and know what's happening. And that simple game of blending sounds together playfully helps them when they get to that point when they know the sounds to be able to read.
That's really interesting. So, as a musician, a lot of the advice that you get from other musicians and from books on learning music is that when you're trying to learn something, you should play it in tempo as it actually would be played, but way slower so that you can really automatize what you're doing and really understand what you're doing and not just sort of do it at a random or rubato tempo where you might not be able to then play it in rhythm after. So it's interesting. Maybe there's some sort of link there to be teased out.
Mm-hmm.
So this is going to my earlier question about structure versus independence. I think that a lot of people who hear about Montessori but don't have experience with it might think, well,
Right.
that seems a little bit too free. Like there's
Right.
not enough structure there, and my kid's not actually going to learn. But what you're saying is, well, actually, they have this inner motivation because they're seeing this stuff everywhere, and they independently want to be able to deal with the world. So they want to be able to read and to write and to do things like that. So I don't know that there's a specific method that's widely adopted in public schools. It's probably, I would guess, some sort of like grab bag of different approaches depending on where you go. But do we have any data that tells us how Montessori stacks up in terms of the child's progress and later, success in life?
Yeah. So people generally think, like you said, that leaving a child free to be independent, to explore and do things on their own is kind of opposite from giving them some sort of structure. But there's a little bit of confusion in there because when you think about freedom and then when you give children freedom and you look at what they're doing, there's a couple different versions of what you might see. You could give children freedom and see that they're finding work that interests them and they're kind of focused, attentive, and engaged. You could give children freedom and they could kind of be idle or minimally engaged. Or you could give children freedom and see that they're kind of crazy and all over the place, out of control. And I think those need to be separated. And when we see children that are out of control, I wouldn't really say that they at that moment have agency, they don't have control or discipline over themselves. And so I like to use the term agency, which really refers to deliberate, kind of more purposeful, ordered, controlled action, and kind of separates out that uncontrolled activity that you might see in freedom sometimes. So when you give children freedom, what we're looking for is for them to be to have agency, to have control over themselves. And then when we look at structure and giving kids structure, you're thinking there's rules in a classroom, or there's a curriculum, or there's the teacher telling the students what they should be doing. But when you look at a Montessori structure in a Montessori prepared environment, you see a different kind of structure. You see like like, yeah, there's materials on the shelves, but those materials are, they kind of come from and are used for the child's internal development. So it matches. The external structure in a Montessori prepared environment matches the internal needs of the child so that as the child is working, they are satisfying their internal needs, and developing, not only that, but developing an internal structure in relation to their work. So for instance, if they're working with the color tablets, where they grade them by shade, the structure and the environment is the different shades of the colors, and they're developing their own perception of that on the inside so that they now have a greater awareness of shades.
Is,
So they're gaining that power. So there's kind of, when you think of structure, you have to think of not only of external structure, but is is it is it helping the child to develop their own internal organization? Montessori would call it the organization of their personality, because you can have a kind of external structure that is actually opposed to their ability to develop on the inside. Like if you're just telling students, here, do this work, and this particular student just doesn't care, it's either too easy or too hard, or they just don't care, that's not helping them to develop internally at all. So you can have external structure that is opposed to or just apart from them developing internally. So I like, instead of thinking of freedom and structure, I think of agency, which is that purposeful attitude, and then structure on the outside, which is guiding and directing that.
so I want to come back to the second point that you mentioned there, where you can have some structure that doesn't really fit the child's needs. But the other thing I wanted to talk about was, you said that there are different ways in which a child, we could mean freedom for the child. And one of those is this sort of uncontrolled time when they're not really developing any sort of structure. I'm wondering, could you give an example of that? Or are there any times when that's just what's needed? Is there a time and place for that sort of less controlled time for, some would say for a kid to be a kid or something like that?
Sure. Yeah. So one of the main tools that Maria Montessori used to assess children and her work in general is by kind of graphing the child's orderly activities. Well, she graphed their activity level, but the plane was ordered and disorder. So sometimes children are engaged in work that's a little bit, they're a little bit ordered. Like, I mean, even you could just think of it as you're reading a story to kids, and at this point they're really paying attention, and then they kind of lose it a little bit, and then there's suspense in the story, and so they're really paying attention, and then someone says something silly, so it drops into disorder, and they're all crazy, and then you got to bring them back, and they're paying attention a little bit, you know. So you can see even just in reading a story, um, these changes from extremely high order, very paying attention, to not so much, a little bit, to disorder.
Got it.
And so, are there times when it's good for children to be in a very high order, very, very focused? And this is, you see this a lot with literacy and math. Those things really, when my 4-year-old is trying to sound out words, you can see the mental effort. It's just really, and he gets exhausted after he's done with it. So yeah, but then it's also good to have times of less ordered work where he's just, I don't know, like doing a puzzle. That would even be kind of medium order for him right now. Lining up his cars would be low order for him. Um, there are times when it's good to have disorder? Um, I don't know. That would be a separate question. I don't think so, off the top of my head, because whenever he is in a period of disorder himself, It's just that he doesn't have control over himself. He's not, and I mean, this happens with any kids. They're just not really with it. And so you want to try to bring them back, usually by really by attracting their attention to something. Reading a book is one that works for my son.
Hmm.
So I don't know if I would ever advocate for disorder, but it's definitely good to have lower or less ordered activities.
Yeah, I
Can I
think
say
that,
one more thing about this that's
yeah, of
interesting?
course, go for it.
What Montessori found was that over time, children in a prepared environment, they have a similar kind of cycle to their work. And usually, and we're starting to see this too, usually they start off with something that's a little bit of a lower order activity, and then they have a rest phase, and then they move into higher ordered work. And as the child is in a prepared environment more and more, that first activity that they choose ends up even being of a significantly high order, and then they don't really have the rest period anymore, and they go right into their, she called it the acme of their work. Um, but it's kind of like building a muscle over time, and the muscle is actually their intelligence, and they're building it and strengthening it over time through work that they just love. It's awesome.
That really is awesome. That's incredible. And you're seeing this in your school. You're seeing them building
Yes.
their intelligence like this.
Yeah. Well, even in my two kids, and then in our school, I have to say that right now we're really understanding this process, this scientific method, more than in previous years. So I'm really looking forward um, to um, how much we can help students to achieve this coming year.
Yeah. I think that the ordered versus disordered plane that you described is pretty useful. And I'm just thinking about, I mentioned this in my talk on Benjamin Franklin because he's got this principle, wealth is not his who has it, but his who enjoys it. And I talked about the importance of play, which is of all the things that Greg McKeown could talk about in his book on essentialism. He's got this book about being focused and getting more done, but he talks about the importance of play. And I think that play is incredibly important. And you sort of allude there a little bit to some of the ways in which play might come in. You know, a less ordered activity or a rest period of some sort where you
Right.
sort of recharge and you give yourself the ability to come back at a problem with a higher level of creativity.
Yeah, there is an element of recharging. And also outside play is kind of a different nature here. You don't want it to you don't want it to ever end up into, you don't want it to be chaotic. You don't want them to be running around crazy disrupting everything. But it's definitely a much lower order, just enjoyable. They're just running around having fun, playing tag and stuff. And that kind of thing does happen a lot in the classroom too. Like, for instance, Maria Montessori didn't develop like magnetiles. I don't know if you know magnetiles. They're little magnets that the kids build like structures with. But we have them in our class because there's times when kids just want to do something that's a little bit easier, and I guess you could call it more playful. Um, and so we want to provide them opportunities for different kinds of work.
Now, if a child does not have the ability to focus on the things that really interest in him, and he is sort of pushed in a certain direction, which I think we associate this with set curriculums, one size fits all
Hmm.
curriculums in the typical schools, how does that affect his ability to build that intelligence muscle that you're talking
Right.
about?
That's a good question. Yeah. So it depends on the child. So some will, but generally they just have to find those areas of interest where they can in whatever environment they are in. It's just that in a teacher-directed, top-down public school curriculum environment, it's going to be much less likely that they'll find things which draw them and really attract their interest and allow them to engage in prolonged work. Like maybe if the math lesson is right where they are, but then there's going to be five kids that already know it and are bored, and another five that um, just don't get it. And then even I mean, even in that case, the children that are somewhat interested, they're usually only trying to understand the lesson enough to complete the task, and then they're kind of done with it after that. So it's like if you were to do those kind of graphs in a public school, you'd get some kids sometimes with some ordered work. Um, but it's really hard to attract kids' attention when they're not free.
Yeah, I know people that, they went to school, they hated it, and they left and they did these incredible things because their mind was free to go after the things that they're really, really interested in. Um,
Yeah, I find that a lot of people nowadays have to like remedially educate themselves in their 20s. Um, and because they just didn't have that muscle, that intelligence strengthening muscle building throughout their formative years. So they don't really know what it's like to have a passion, to really dig into something, to have to make connections on their own. Like we talk about we want our students to be making discoveries of their own every day. They don't know what that's like, and if 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 they don't know what it's like to really be into something, how are they going to find a career? How are they going to know what, like, even how to think about relationships? Um, it just makes life very difficult. So what we are trying to do, our mission is at the school at Atlas Academy, is to discover and figure out the conditions that really optimize for human growth from birth to maturity. I don't think we really know, like at this point in human history, what people are really capable of. I think that we've come really far in our natural sciences and like with business and engineering, stuff like that, technology. But when it comes to understanding ourselves as humans and and children and their growth process and what they need and how to really get the most uh, out of each human being, which means how to help each child to reach their full potential. We just haven't done that yet. That's really what inspires me with this work is trying to help each child to um, get the most out of their life to really flourish as much as possible. And what we need to do is figure out the conditions which lead to um, that achievement.
I think you're right. It's so exciting to think about 100 years from now. People are going to look back and be like, "What they did? What to try to get these
Right?
people prepared for life and to be an independent adults?" And you brought up, remedial education in your 20s and maybe even later for some people that went through public school, and the sort of standard fare was this training in acclimating yourself to doing stuff that you're not that interested in doing. And so you get later in life and you're like, what do I do? I don't have anyone to set the curriculum for me anymore.
You might not even know that it's an option to have a passion and go and do it, because you're just so used to just doing what you're told over and over again.
This reminds me, it's just a beautiful integration here with Isaac Morehouse, who, I've had him on this show. He's spoken at our conferences, and he has this mantra: don't do stuff you hate. And it seems like there's this beautiful dovetail between Montessori education and the sort of adult you can become, an independent adult that is focused on the things that you really enjoy, where you can actually create real value. So what is next for
Right.
you guys at Atlas Academy?
So next for us is trying to be really authentic to Montessori's scientific method and refine and expand um, the the work that she did. So refine it, um, really kind of reinvent it, validate it ourselves, take on her project, um, and become teacher scientists. She actually calls them that. She thinks that all teachers should really be scientists because we're working with organic life. And just as any biologist would study their life forms and their natural environments to learn about them, um, that's what teachers should be doing too. And so we really want to take on this scientific approach um, because we think it'll help us to refine things where they need to be refined and um, and then to take it forward. And So right now we're up to, and then just keep expanding in grades. One other thing about what's next for us is that our focus is really going to be on quality. Over the next decade, our plan is to develop one just extremely high quality school, big, beautiful campus at some point, one really high quality school with just obviously exceptional students all the way through high school.
I love it. And are there any resources out there for parents who are listening to this and that, maybe they have a Montessori school close by, but maybe they don't? What should they know? What should they go read? What should they check out?
There's actually a lot of good parenting literature out there now. You could just Google some of that. You see lists of the top 10 books because parenting research in the last 50 years has gotten pretty good. And other than that, it's one caution I would have actually is that there's a lot of versions of Montessori. So there's many different kinds of Montessori teachers, many different kinds of Montessori schools. And typically, so people would say you have to find what you think is authentic Montessori, but then even that, usually they would just say, find a school that has trained certified teachers, because you can even open a Montessori school without trained certified teachers. But I don't think that goes far enough. Authentic to me means doing it scientifically. Um, but I don't. I actually am. I'm sure there's schools out there that do that to some extent. So if I were looking at a Montessori school, that's what I would be looking at.
Yeah, and of course, if you're curious and you want to know, okay, is this authentic? I guess one place you could go is to the source. You could go read Montessori's works. I've got a book by her called The Absorbent Mind that brings together a bunch of her essays and really shows the philosophy of it. I think it's a little bit light on the practical application side, but I think that it gives you the sort of standards by which to then go and assess, okay, does this really do what
Oh
Montessori had
yeah.
in mind?
Yeah, it's not entire. Most people find her work a little bit inaccessible, but if you have the interest and patience for the language is a little bit old, but if you can get into it, she's just got it's just like page after page of gems.
She does. The
It
quote I read
yeah,
earlier when I came across it, I was like, this is amazing.
I know, yeah,
Montessori's
and
great.
there's like not even there's probably hundreds of those because she not even just dozens because she wrote a lot. Yeah.
Great. So where can people check out your work and keep up with what you guys are doing?
Yeah, thanks. So just atlas-academy.org as our website, and there you can watch some videos, see what our classrooms are like. I update with videos every once in a while about what we're doing, um, and then you can also message me through the website.
Excellent. Well, you guys are about an hour away from me, so thank you so much
You
for
got to
coming
come
on.
and
I'm going to
check it out,
come
John.
I'm going to come check out the school sometime soon
Yeah.
and hang out with you guys and see what's going on there. So, thanks everyone for listening. If you're enjoying the show, please do give us a rating or a review. And as always, I'd love to hear from you. You can email me at john@theobjectivestandard.com. That's all for today. Thanks for listening. Until next time, happy flourishing.